there will be some restriction as to what can be bought in the near future. So the near-term inflation picture is really anyone's guess. You certainly will have a lot of impact from the collapse of oil prices, and we could indeed get, a couple of months of negative CPI readings. However, over the medium to long term, I think what we are witnessing today is really planting the seeds for what I would expect to be a decade of stagflation.
What is a decade of stagflation? All right, define for our audience your view of what is stagflation and what would cause it to be such a long-term phenomenon in this economy.
Well, so, stagflation is literally economic stagnation, or let's say below average growth, and at the same time, rapid increase in price. I mean, that was a condition that we saw in the 70s in the U.S. And in many throughout the 20th century in many parts of Latin America, parts of Europe in the 1930s. So below economic growth, I think, is something that's increasingly getting obvious that we're not going to get a very rapid V-shaped recovery. I mean, even in the markets that are indeed coming out of this, nothing has come back to normal. Some consumption pattern have changed, investment has changed, usually for the worse. I mean, we'll also have to deal with the consequences of the bailouts that we so casually made. I mean, if anything, the experience in Europe shows that there's no such thing as an emergency lending program. So that's on the real economy side. And then on the monetary economy, I mean, we have a level of monetary and fiscal accommodation that simply the world hasn't seen before. Right now, it doesn't matter because the velocity of money is people are locked at home. But as soon as the economy reopens, it's really anyone guess where it can go. And it seems to me that the sole focus on deflation is very misplaced.
Let's talk about what we mean when we say stagflation, because I'm looking at your report, and typically stagflation means rising prices of the things you need to buy and wages not necessarily keeping pace, and basically consumption remaining flat or declining, and just sort of the global energy of business just sort of remaining at a stall speed. Is that a bad thing, and is that an accurate reflection of what you're talking about with stagflation?
Right. I mean, generally, stagflation is not a good environment for the owners of capital and assets. I mean, it's your worst outcome. It means that, your stocks are not doing so great because inflation is high, margins compress, growth is not that great, at least in real term, and your bonds really get hit the worst. I mean, that's what happened in the 70s. I mean, savage bear markets for equities, they went nowhere for a decade, and then really devastation in the bond market. And also usually see is the correlation between stocks and bonds turning from negative as it is today to positive. I tend to be a little more optimistic about the real economy. I think at the end of the day, some period of high inflation could be, or real price inflation at least, and deflation of the asset price could be what's needed to solve the strong generational imbalances that we are seeing in the U.S. I think there is a huge generational problem that's hiding today between the young who are mostly poor and who are bearing the cost of the lockdowns, and the older generation that really owned all the asset. And in a curious way, a decade of inflation could actually help that transfer, which must take place.
Vincent Deluard, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your thoughts and your most recent research report entitled A Crazy But Logical Call for Stagflation. Vincent Deluard, global macro strategist for INTL FC Stone, based in San Francisco. So, Lisa, I think my takeaway here is stagflation, not good. But certainly a very real possibility as we come out of whatever recession we have resulting from the coronavirus.
Yeah, I don't know how crazy a call that is, actually. I've heard a lot of people call for something similar. I think that the most interesting part of this period of time is just how philosophical people are getting it. We heard that from Ray Dalio, but we also are seeing that in the PIMCO economic report that they just released. People trying to say, this is going to be a different era, and it's going to be marked by money printing. And I think that that's sort of the conundrum. When you have helicopter cash, that changes the equation in terms of what that money is worth. And I think that that's what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're looking at right now. And again, crossing the tape just recently that this fiscal stimulus that we had for small businesses, that money is now gone as of today. It's been spent. It's been allocated, putting more pressure on Congress to come back with an additional round of fiscal stimulus to get money in the hands of small businesses and of consumers. The pressure is mounting. This is Bloomberg.
Right now, let's head down to our 99.1 studios in Washington, D.C. Nathan Hager there with world and national headlines. Nathan.
Well, it is the top headline of the moment, Lisa and Paul. The small business lending program in the coronavirus stimulus package is out of funds. The White House made that announcement moments ago as Congress remains bitterly divided over how to replenish the $349 billion Paycheck Protection Program. Democrats want more funds for hospitals as well as state and local governments. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says there is an urgent need for resources.
If the federal government fails us, then I want to be really clear. The notion of this city recovering, it doesn't work if we can't do the basics.
An analysis from Bloomberg Law finds New York City's received the least amount of federal grants per infected person from the Department of Health and Human Services, even though it has the highest number of COVID-19 cases in the U.S. President Trump plans to issue guidelines later today that governors can follow to relax stay-at-home rules. Oregon's Kate Brown tells ABC News her state's forming a West Coast alliance with California and Washington State to set their own parameters for reopening.
It includes having adequate personal protective equipment. It includes adequate testing capacity. It includes the ability to do contact tracing, a robust public health system, and it includes the ability to isolate or quarantine those who are testing positive.
Politico and other outlets report that the White House has invited a bipartisan group of several dozen House and Senate members to form a task force on reopening the economy. That's after the president consulted about 200 business leaders in a series of phone calls yesterday. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nathan Hager. This is Bloomberg.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President and Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at seic.com/seize change.
In-depth analysis.
Because you can't watch Trolls World Tour at the cinema, Sky Store is bringing the cinema home to you with Sky Store Premiere.
I'm going to destroy all music except for rock.
We need to unite the trolls to save all music.
Our brand new service that lets you watch movies at home that would normally be in the cinema.
Rock and roll!
Let's go save the world!
Yeah! Prepare for battle.
This ought to be good. Enjoy Trolls World Tour now on Sky Store Premiere, bringing the cinema to you.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip 3, have a game night. In fact, why not make it a game day? Whether you're quarantined with kids or roommates, nothing passes the time like a game of cards, Pictionary, charades, dominoes, or Never Have I Ever. If you've got the hardware, break out the video game console and enjoy hours of guilt-free gaming. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen from Home on TuneIn.
For weeks, we've heard about panicked shoppers causing a run on toilet paper by irrationally hoarding it. But that ignores one key factor.
That the toilet paper you use when you leave the home is not the same toilet paper you use at home.
How incomplete information, whether about supply chains or infection rates, leads to incomplete narratives. Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC Studios on TuneIn today.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn. Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Get the latest breaking news alerts and listening suggestions for new stations and podcasts. Let TuneIn keep you in the loop with push notifications. Just go to your device's settings and allow push notifications from TuneIn to get live alerts and recommendations on the audio you want to know about.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
More than 22 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits since mid-March, and that is top of mind for investors as markets fluctuate with small losses and small gains. Now, while still exceeding 5 million, the initial claims for unemployment insurance in the week ending last Friday were down by 1.37 million from the prior week. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500 is up just about 0.1%, up 1. The Dow is down 0.6%, down 137, and the NASDAQ is up 1%, up 83. The 10-year is currently up 10/30 seconds with a yield of 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is reversed course. It's now up 1.25% at $20.12 a barrel, while COMEX gold is currently up 0.8% at $17.5450 an ounce. The dollar yen is at 107.32. The euro at $1.866. And the British pound, $1.2471. Conoco will cut all fracking crews in the U.S. shale operations. Executives now say in a call that Conoco may reduce oil output even further in June. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
And Market Drivers is brought to you by New Jersey Institute of Technology, ranked one of the most research-intensive universities in the nation by the Carnegie Classification. More at njit.edu/R1. So, Lisa, kind of an interesting day to the markets here, kind of very mixed. You got the NASDAQ up over 1%, but the Dow and S&P just kind of flattish. Dow actually down about 0.5%. So it's kind of a strange day in the marketplace. We had that terrible jobs number again, the cumulative 22 million jobs lost over the last several weeks. That's equal to the total amount of jobs that were created since the financial crisis. So just extraordinary. Yeah. People are just trying to question, how do I position myself in this market? Nobody better to chat about that, Lisa, than Barry Ritholtz, Ritholtz Capital Management, Bloomberg opinion columnist and podcast extraordinaire. Barry, thanks so much for joining us. Okay, the jobs number came in ugly. We're going to get some terrible unemployment numbers. We're going to get some terrible GDP numbers. Is it reasonable for this equity market to be looking to the other side?
Yes and no. I mean, a lot of what the market is looking at is what's unknown and what sort of probability bet markets can make. Look, we already know that we're in a deep recession, if not a depression. We're probably coming close to the numbers we saw during the Great Depression. I've seen some people say we have 8 or 9 or 10% unemployment. That's a way lagging number. We're probably closer to 20 on our way to 30% if this lockdown continues much longer. So the market already understands that. The market is already reflecting that. The question is, as we start to see various things to test, as we start to see various ways of treating the virus, as we come to the end of the really, really bad part of not knowing what happens next, markets are making up half the losses and then some. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if we saw a retest of those prior lows, and if the news doesn't get any better, we could make new lows. But historically, markets are trying to figure out where is the greater risk, to the upside or to the downside. When you fall 35% in a month, the risk tends to be towards the upside, and that's what the market has been working off the past couple of weeks. That and a $2 trillion stimulus.
Right. Barry, here's what I'm struggling with. It all makes sense. If you're a long-term investor, these companies have value. We will bounce back, blah, blah, blah. I get it. I hear it every day. And I buy it to an extent. And then you have people who are basically saying the entire paradigm is changing. You cannot put the world on hold. People are staying at home, but there's a transformation going on in terms of business, in terms of priorities, in terms of savings and household wealth. And will the other side of this look profoundly different, with a different inflationary point of view, with a different tax structure, with a different social kind of fiber?
Well, there's an easy answer to that and then the more challenging answer to that. And let me take it in that order. The easy answer is pre-existing trends are going to accelerate, and things that were already beginning to happen are going to happen much more quickly. And a couple of quick examples. The United States has been over-retailed, much more square footage on a per capita basis for retail stores than, say, the UK or Japan or Italy. And so that giant footprint of retail stores were already pressured. This is just going to accelerate that. This is going to accelerate the move towards online. It's going to accelerate the move to get rid of giant shopping malls. They're going to have to come up with something beyond, here's some stuff, come buy it, as a business model. But that's been in place that trend has been in existence for 2 decades. Same with the remote work, the virtual work, the work from home. I mean, I've been working at home on Fridays over the summer for years and years, and over the past couple of years, it became easy to keep doing that. I wonder how this is going to impact office space. It dawned on me that for the 10,000 square feet I have in my office, I could probably fit double the number of people if people don't need to work 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. You can change that. That's something that was already in the works over the past couple of years. That's going to accelerate. And then, generally speaking, the move towards service economy away from actually physically manufacturing goods, that continues to accelerate. The more difficult question is, what's going to reverse? The fact that we have just-in-time deliveries and just-in-time supply chains, that's going to have to change in some way. The fact that we don't make all sorts of essential equipment, from ventilators to N95 masks to God knows what else, there's going to be a national security question of why isn't this manufactured on the continental United States? It's anybody's guess how that resolves. And there are going to be a lot of other questions about national security, about trade, about a variety of issues. That's going to have a significant impact on the economy. Figuring out how that plays out is going to be a function of how the virus and its management evolves over the next year. And I certainly think, and I don't want to turn this into a political debate, but I think everybody is very much in agreement that the outcome of the November election is going to have a significant impact on a variety of different things, whether it's national medical supply emergency stockpiling or an infrastructure build-out. There's going to be some significant changes relative to this next election. And so trying to figure out where the market's going to go relative to all those variables, it's always a best guess. It's always a probabilistic exercise, but no one really has a clear view as to what we're going to look like 6 months or a year from now. Some trends are obvious. There's a lot of things that are happening below the surface that we really won't know about.
Yeah. Barry Ritholtz, thank you so much for being with us. Barry Ritholtz, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management, a Bloomberg opinion columnist, and of course, the host of Masters of Business on Bloomberg Radio. A lot of questions, a lot of big questions, and a lot of small questions like, what are you going to do with your kids if you have to be at work and they are bothering you? Sometimes just looking for a hug, which is actually very lovely. I do want to bring you this. I think it's interesting. You're seeing the airline shares absolutely sink today after United Airlines said that travel demand was essentially zero and showed no signs of improving in the near term.
It's interesting. I have this app on my phone, Lisa, that tracks air traffic. We're here in the Metro New York area. There's always so much going on here. And usually there are literally dozens, if not close to 100 planes parked at each of Newark, LaGuardia, and JFK on a daily basis. You look at it now, and there might be one or two, literally one or two at each of those airports, one of which is a FedEx or UPS plane. There's literally nothing in the air right now.
Paul, what else? What other kinds of apps do you have on your phone?
You track
planes on your phone. I think that's awesome.
It is. I got that from George Ferguson, Bloomberg's airline analyst. So if you ever know what's going on. Shout out to George Ferguson. We track planes on our phones, or at least Paul Sweetie does. I'm Lisa Abramowitz. Coming up, we'll take a look at economic trends. This is Bloomberg.
Business is like a...
Because you can't watch Trolls World Tour at the cinema, Sky Store is bringing the cinema home to you with Sky Store Premiere.
I'm going to destroy all music except for rock. We need to unite the trolls to save all music.
Our brand new service that lets you watch movies at home that would normally be in the cinema.
Rock and roll! Let's go save the world! Yes!
Prepare for battle.
This ought to be good. Enjoy Trolls World Tour now on Sky Store Premiere, bringing the cinema to you.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of active
on the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, we'll look at race, politics, and the pandemic.
Social distancing is critical, but you have to have a certain class position, really, to be able to fully engage that practice.
I'll talk with Kianga Yamada-Taylor. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
Are we on the brink of a more serious downturn?
I've always thought of the municipal bond market as a little bit of a safe haven.
Banks are going to have to start paying their depositors more.
Are we still in that mode where we're buying the dips?
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
Cash, if you're looking at treasury bills, provides a higher return than stocks and bonds here in the U.S.
If your consumer is a woman, you're more likely to be a growth company.
Longer-term interest rates can go down, even with short-term interest rates still going up a little bit.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Coming up, we are awaiting comments from the daily press briefing from Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. We will bring that to you in just moments. And then at the bottom of the hour, it's scheduled for New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo to have his daily press briefing. We will bring those comments to you right now. But right now, let's go down to Washington, D.C. For D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Focus on two very important issues, and that is voting in Washington, D.C., and Washingtonians completing the 2020 census. So I'm joined today by the chairman of the district's Board of Elections, Chairman Michael Bennett, who will provide an update on the board's plans for mail-in ballot and in-person voting for the June 2nd primary, and Andrew Trueblood, who leads the district's Office of Planning, who is responsible for our outreach for the 2020 census. Before I do that, let me provide some specific updates about the district's experience with COVID-19. We reported this morning 153 new positive cases, and sadly an additional 9 people who have succumbed to the illness. And as we continue to see and report these numbers, our message is the same. By staying home, we're driving down the curve, and we will save lives in the district. So my reminder is that you only go out for essential activities and wear a face covering. Yesterday, I issued a new mayor's order that extends our public health emergency through May 15th. We will share more about what that means for our community at tomorrow's briefing. But we know that by extending this order and by continuing to stay home and practice proper social distancing, we will save lives. Today is a holiday in Washington, D.C. It's D.C. Emancipation Day, a day we celebrate the courage and perseverance of those who fought to end slavery, and also when we recognize that D.C.'s fight for full equality is not over. And it won't be over until we have 2 senators and a voting representative in the House, until we never again are designated a territory for any purpose. Our residents, we know, pay federal taxes. We operate as a state, and we should be a state. Under normal circumstances, we would be having a big parade and concert on Freedom Plaza, and we look forward to getting back to those celebrations next year. And while a lot of things are on hold right now, a few things are not, and that is voting and completing your 2020 census. And fortunately, you can do both of those things from home. You can complete your census online in less than 10 minutes at 2020census.gov. You can also call 1-844-330-2020. I encourage you to do that today. All you need is your address. In fact, our COVID-19 emergency funding is directly tied to the census, so it's especially important for D.C. residents to complete the census this year. So now let me turn to Chairman Bennett, who is the chair of the D.C. Board of Elections, to talk about the board's progress toward the June 2nd primary.
We've been listening to Mayor Muriel Bowser of Washington, D.C., talking about the latest when it comes to the coronavirus and the spread in the D.C. region. Also talking about a real hot-button issue, Paul, which is the desire to be treated like a state and receive better funding rather than a territory or a city, given the fact that Washington, D.C. is its own entity, not belonging to any state. And this has been a big point of contention, as it will be going forward. Right now, we are looking very much at the path of the virus in Washington, D.C. We have President Trump and others trying to plan for what it would look like to reopen the economy. Right now, we have the NASDAQ up 1.3%, really outperforming everything else. The S&P up 0.3%, and the Dow down by 0.25%. But Paul, it's really been notable to see how tech has emerged as sort of the stalwart, the safe haven, if you will, as people all turn to their cyber worlds in order to stay connected.
Absolutely. We have Amazon and Netflix all-time highs today, and that's clearly specific to their business models and how they are benefiting from this change in consumer behavior, to whether it's getting more and more products shipped to your front door as opposed to going out and shopping, or whether it's staying at home and doing what you're supposed to be doing and quarantining, and you got to kill the time somehow, and certainly Netflix and binging and all that kind of good stuff. It's also good for the Walt Disney Company just reported recently that they had over 50 million subscribers to Disney Plus, and that's just in a space of a few months, which is, most people were thinking that was going to take them, 2, 3, 4 years to get to that level. So again, kind of a little silver lining is that some of these streaming services, I guess people are just locked into their houses and they get an opportunity to just sample across the board.
Yeah, it's definitely good for streaming. And also we're seeing an uptick in certain pharmaceutical shares as people look to testing, vaccines, medications that could potentially put an end to this pandemic. Max Neeson, Bloomberg opinion columnist covering all things healthcare, joining us now. And Max, it's great to have you on as we talk about reopening the economy, the focus really on testing right now. How capable are we to actually figure out how much of the population could be infected, has been infected, and can go back to work? Where are we in terms of the testing capabilities with less than 3% of the population currently being tested?
Not especially close to where we need to be at all. We're still at a place where you have backlogs, delays, difficulty getting tested at sort of the hot spots. And that's the first place where you want to have capability. In order to reopen responsibly, you're going to need to have the sort of capability where you can not only test anyone that shows up symptomatic, but test and retest frontline healthcare workers, people in sort of the stage of reopening, be able to test people that are trying to go back to work in high contact situations. So that means, not just a small improvement on what we have now, but a massive one. And that's something that's going to take time. The initial testing ramp-ups, when things were going faster, you were just using existing equipment. Now you're getting to the point where you actually have to build what kind of the industry refers to as new boxes, new machines that can actually run the tests, as opposed to just tests going into it. And then there are all these other little supply chains that are kind of showing up as not as robust as you might hope. Things like reagents needed to run the tests, pipettes, all this little stuff that swabs, things that you need to run the test, and all of those feed into kind of slowing down the ramp up, the plateau that we're seeing in the testing rate. So that needs to change and soon, as we kind of look forward to the president putting out some kind of reopening guidelines today.
Max, just 30 seconds here. Are there any countries that have this pretty well underhand?
I can point to Germany, which is doing a pretty good job, but just because they're doing well now doesn't mean that'll last in the future. Singapore, initially doing really well, now has a bit of a bigger outbreak, although we'll see if they're able to get back to that good place that they were in a little bit earlier in the year.
Max Neeson, Bloomberg opinion columnist, joining us with respect to reopening the economy. Basically, the plan would be, Paul, to test a lot of people, both for antibodies as well as for the virus, and then track the contacts with people who had been infected. I got to say, it's going to be really interesting from a privacy standpoint with all of the surveillance, with Google and Apple participating. Where do you draw the lines, except it is necessary? I don't know. I'm thinking a lot about this right now.
Yeah, I think most people, believe it or not, I think most people are probably err on, let's just get these tests out there as quickly as possible.
Well,
We'll deal with some of those issues at a later date, but that has to be job one.
Well, testing and then tracking and the surveillance, everybody agrees. And I think that's going to be a very important step, but it's a little bit anathema to the whole, zeitgeist of the American spirit and independence, et cetera, et cetera. But I think everyone's saying, look, for the good of the public health, let's just get on it already and figure out how to move on. Right now, let's move on to Washington, D.C. Nathan Hager down there with world and national headlines. Nathan.
Lisa, the funds have run out on the $349 billion program aimed at helping small businesses weather the coronavirus pandemic. The White House made that announcement just this morning. We have details from Amy Morris in our Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington.
Sources tell Bloomberg News Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and the Democrats were still, quote, far apart on the next stage of a relief package when talks ended last night. Banks are flooded with applications, but many small businesses won't get any aid unless Congress comes up with additional funding. Republicans are pushing for another $250 billion for the program, but Democrats want more money to help other groups, too. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
With signs the coronavirus could be peaking in some parts of the country, President Trump plans to release guidelines later today for states to relax stay-at-home rules. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti says he doesn't foresee many large-scale public events until next year.
As Mayor de Blasio said, as I think Mayor Cantrell has said in New Orleans, it's difficult to imagine us getting together in the thousands anytime soon. So I think we should be prepared for that this year.
Multiple media outlets report the president's invited a bipartisan group of House and Senate members to form a task force on reopening the economy. Those invitations went out today. The fight to end polio in Africa could be an early casualty of the president's decision to cut funding to the World Health Organization. That's what the UN health body is saying now. WHO suspended polio vaccination campaigns this month so that health workers could be freed up for the coronavirus fight. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
You've always relied on Bloomberg's strong Asian presence.
You didn't mention any particular areas in China. Let me just go to Hong Kong.
And now you need it even more.
Where are we in terms of understanding President Xi?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
We're starting to see infections in some of the Asian countries.
Tonight at 6 Eastern.
Do you ever get the feeling some people just weren't prepared?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
My mother was always very active and independent, and she was familiar with her neighborhood. But one day, she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual. She wasn't even really sure where she was at.
It's important for you to talk to someone about it. I felt so much better after my son told me, Mom, we'll figure it out.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
What if you could keep the top economic experts in a conference room next to your office without having to feed them?
Do we need better optics? Do we need some substance? Do CEOs care about ESG?
We have seen quite a lot of stimulus pumped into the system already.
It's the biggest warning yet about the financial risks of climate change.
Now there are more ways to hear us. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and at BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, The world is listening.
1 in 3 adults has prediabetes. 1 in 3. That means it could be you, your football buddy, your football buddy, or you, your best man, your worst man, you, your dog walker, your cat jogger. While 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
Okay, people, I've got the daily checklist. Who today has eaten dinner for breakfast? Tick. Started a chore you'll never finish? Tick. Done a conference call in your pajamas? Tick. Here's another for your list. BritBox. Streaming the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, and now Channel 4. All in one place and ad-free. So add BritBox to your list and get a 30-day free trial of the biggest box of British box sets. Search BritBox free trial. Tick. Biggest compared to other SVOD providers. Auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless cancelled. T's and C's apply.
This is a message from the government. Coronavirus is a national emergency. Life-threatening for people of all ages everywhere in the UK. To help save lives, you must stay home. Only go outside for food, health reasons, daily exercise, or to work. But only if you cannot work from home. Stay home. Anyone can get it, and anyone can spread it. Stay home to help protect the NHS and frontline staff working to save lives. Coronavirus. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I went up high school here in New York
Find these
City.
and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn. Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, search sports documentaries on the TuneIn app. Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Treasuries surge while stocks are mixed amid data showing the brutal impact of the pandemic on the world's largest economy. The S&P's been fluctuating as the Dow Jones Industrial Average falls, and big tech companies push the NASDAQ higher. We look at those numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P 500 is now up 0.5%, up 12. The Dow's down 0.1%, down 26, and the NASDAQ is up 1.5%, up 123. The 10-year is up 8/32 with a yield of 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up 1.7% at $20.20 a barrel, while COMEX gold is up 0.4% at $17.46 even per ounce. The dollar yen is at 107.75. The euro $1.839. The British pound $1.2445. Ford Motor Company has hired a former leader of Israel's military intelligence corps to oversee its big data analytics as the automaker moves to connect all its cars to the internet. Retired Colonel Gilguri Ari will become chief of Ford's global data insight and analytics on May 1st. Right now, Ford is down 0.8% at just about $5 a share. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Paul, I got to say, I'm looking forward to the time when economic data releases are less emotional. When you don't sort of feel this sort of stunning shock every time you see a new unemployment print. I got to say, yes, the jobless claims came in less terrible than people had expected. 5.2 million people lost their jobs. And we're just seeing one statistic after another defy any historical precedent. And it raises a question, with an economy in free fall, how quickly will it take to climb out of this hole? And joining us is someone who's been tracking this for decades and who has a good sense of what perhaps is the historical precedent or lack thereof. Carl Weinberg, I'm so glad to say, founder and chief international economist of High Frequency Economics, joining us now. Carl, when you take a look at these jobless claims, what's your sense of how many of them can actually come back once the economy starts to restart and we do see a sign of a plateauing of the pandemic?
Hi, Lisa. Good morning on this grim day for data. The answer to your question is simple. I don't know. And you're going to get that answer a lot from me today. In order to be able to forecast the future, I think we have to have at least three basic facts that we do know, none of which are evident right now. How long is this going to go on, this lockdown? Number two, how low will the economy fall? What will be the bottom for GDP growth and for the peak for unemployment? And number three, how many firms are going to not make it through all of this and not come back? Because that'll give us the starting level of the unemployment rate when we come back. If 10% of the firms that are out there don't come back, then 10% of the jobs will be lost. We'll be starting with an unemployment rate in the double digits, and that will gauge how long we come back, how long it takes us to get back.
So, Carl, give us a sense of how critical it is for the folks down in Washington and in Congress to really be consistent and aggressive with fiscal stimulus. We just heard today that small business part of the initial fiscal stimulus, that has been exhausted as of today, really putting pressure on Congress to act once again.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical. I wouldn't call it fiscal stimulus, Paul. I would give it a different name. I would call it bridge financing. Yeah. What we're really doing here is we're taking companies that have an unsurvivable hit to their cash flows, and we're letting them finance that hit over an affordable period of time. It's the oldest trick in banking. It's restructuring. We're restructuring the pain. So I would say that we have to get bridge financing in the hands of companies that need it ASAP, because once they fold and the jobs are lost, then no matter when we unlock down, we're still going to be at we're not going to be able to put these people back to work.
So based on what we've seen in China, some people are saying the economy can restart in a fairly robust manner, just looking at copper demand and other gauges out of China. Do you glean the same kind of optimistic signs based on what we're seeing?
Well, I'm cautioning our high-frequency economics readers not to use China as a blueprint for what to expect here. And the reason is that their rather draconian lockdown probably contained the virus to one province. And even though it was a big province, it's only 5% of the economy. So they never locked down the entire economy as we did. So the pain is felt in a smaller portion of it. Sure, the supply chains were interlinked, but we didn't see companies failing around the nation. Now, everybody's going to say, oh, China is not lying, they're not reporting the numbers, blah, blah, blah. All right, but if we had seen a national shutdown there rather than just a provincial shutdown there, there's no way to cover that up. All right, China's definitely been hit, but I think they were nicked a lot less than we're being hit over here.
And Carl, I think initially there was hope I think I'm going to use the word hope as opposed to anything else, for a V-shaped recovery here. But it just seems if we're going to get some of the numbers that people are talking about, i.e. 30 to 40% decline in second quarter GDP, kind of 20% plus unemployment, that type of shock to the system suggests that may cause some real structural longer-term damage. How are you kind of thinking about those aspects?
I think people who see the solution as a V-shaped recovery defined in terms of growth have to rethink their arithmetic starting from day one. The rate of growth of GDP is irrelevant to how we're going to come back. The unemployment rate is linked, or the level of employment is linked to the level of economic activity. So if we go down 30%, right, in terms of level, right, and then we come back to the same 2% GDP growth rate that we had before, then yes, we will have a V-shaped recovery in terms of growth, but we'll be starting with 25% fewer jobs in the economy, and it's going to take a really long time to come back from that. The V-shape in terms of growth is a nice thing to think about. It makes us feel good, but the real problem is a V-shape in terms of the level of GDP, and that's going to take years to get back, so it'll be years before we get our full employment back.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, that's kind of, I think, where some people, as more and more data comes in, kind of discounting that V-shaped recovery. Carl Weinberg, founder and chief international economist for High Frequency Economics. Thanks so much for joining us. We always appreciate your perspective. And Lisa, I think, the question I think a lot of people are trying to get a handle on here from an economic perspective is what structurally is going to change in the economy as we kind of go through this shock to the system.
Yeah, people are expecting the savings rate to go up as people feel less confident going forward. And then there's just the question, okay, bridge financing is one thing, but the federal government is printing money. And is this just going to plug a deflationary gap and just lead to something that's less deflationary? Or is it going to lead to a new paradigm?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming up, Lisa, we're going to have New York State Governor Andrew coming up at the bottom of the hour. We'll get the latest on what's going on in the state of New York and in this city of New York City. For Lisa Abramowitz, I'm Paul Sweeney, and this is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks are now mixed this session, with the S&P edging slightly higher and the Dow dropping. More than 5 million people have filed unemployment claims last week, taking the total over the past month to 22 million. Small businesses reeling in the face of the pandemic, and the loan program to help has run out of funds. The Small Business Administration said it has stopped accepting applications for the federal relief fund. Companies have flooded banks with applications. President Trump is considering paying American producers to stop pumping to alleviate the surplus that's destroyed prices. The Energy Department is said to have drafted a plan to compensate companies for sitting on as much as 365 million barrels worth of oil reserves. And Ford is experimenting with giving employees wearable social distancing devices to keep them apart once its factories reopen. Volunteers are testing wristbands that vibrate when employees come within 6 feet of one another. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
The market's in focus every business day. The P&L Podcast with Paul Sweeney and Lisa Abramowitz.
Are there some sectors that you want to have more or less exposure to?
What's behind this engine of gains?
Analysis of the day's Wall Street action.
The U.S. market looks relatively safe.
From Bloomberg Intelligence, Bloomberg Opinion, and influential newsmakers.
Ward McCarthy joins us right now.
P&L with Paul Sweeney and Lisa Abramowitz. Listen today on Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Are you interested in a challenging...
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is,
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you.
The best sports story all day, 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week.
ESPN Daily.
Search ESPN Daily to listen.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I went to high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn. TuneIn makes it easy to be a part of the conversation. Just make sure push notifications are enabled to hear about breaking news and trending topics from around the sports world. You'll also get custom recommendations of podcasts and radio stations covering the sports and teams you care about.
How do you keep track of all your favorite stations and podcasts? Easy. You add them to your favorites list. Just find the audio you want to bookmark and tap the heart icon. Then, whenever you want to browse your favorites, you'll find everything under the Favorites tab.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip 3, have a game night. In fact, why not make it a game day? Whether you're quarantined with kids or roommates, nothing passes the time like a game of cards, Pictionary, charades, dominoes, or Never Have I Ever. If you've got the hardware, break out the video game console and enjoy hours of guilt-free gaming. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen From Home on TuneIn.
Casting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up, we are going to be hearing from Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York State, who will be talking about the latest on coronavirus and what has become the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States. Plus, we talk about the surveillance efforts by some of the big tech world and how they are cooperating with the government. Right now, though, let's head over to Greg Jarrett for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
Treasuries are up, Lisa. This amid unemployment and housing data that indicates the impact of the pandemic on the U.S. economy. Stocks have rebounded a bit. In a very volatile session, the S&P did resume gains as consumer and tech companies rally. We look at the numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P is up just about 0.4%, up 10. The Dow is still down 0.4%, down 95. While the NASDAQ is up 1.6%, up 130. The 10-year is up 6/30 seconds with a yield of 0.61%. West Texas Intermediate crude is up 1.1% at $20.10 per barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.5% at $17.4880 an ounce. The dollar yen stands at 107.67. The euro $1.837, and the British pound $1.2438. Emboldened by Federal Reserve backing, companies owned by private equity firms are looking to get in on the global rally in the credit market. Surgery Partners, for example, which is majority owned by Bain Capital, is bringing just the fourth U.S. leveraged loan in the past month. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, one of the key aspects of bending the curve is contact tracing. And the governments around the world are scrambling to build up their contact tracing capabilities. And even the private sector is getting in on the act. Apple and Google announcing that they're joining forces to build a contact tracing app that also protects data privacy. But that's got a lot of regulators a little bit nervous. To get the latest, we welcome Alex Webb, European technology columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, joining us. He's based in London. Alex, thanks so much for joining us. So we've got the Apple and Google, two of the biggest tech companies in the world, joining forces to build this app. I suspect the European regulators, who have always had a keen eye towards U.S. tech companies and data privacy, are going to want to know more about this.
Yes, but actually the approach they've taken pretty much was endorsed by the European Union today. What they're talking about, fundamentally, there are two ways of doing this. One, you upload a bunch of data into the cloud, which says where you've been, and then whoever controls that cloud and that database can tally it against where others have been. And if someone tests positive, they can therefore work out who's got it or who might have been exposed to it. The way that Apple and Google, the solution they propose is more that the data stays on your phone. It's much like things like Face ID, where it has a 3D scanner of your face, but that data is always within your phone, never goes up to the cloud. What happens here is your phone will detect proximity to other devices via Bluetooth, and if one of those devices at a certain point the owner tests positive for the virus, alerts the relevant authorities, or the relevant authorities give them a code, which means they can alert everyone, and then every day your phone will download an encrypted identifier of which would have the identities of everyone who's been infected with the virus, and then see whether you've been in close contact with them. So it always stays on the device until someone has actually been infected.
How do you protect personal privacy with this program? Actually, Alex, I'm sorry to do this right now. We are going to head over and listen to Andrew Cuomo. Alex Webb is a Bloomberg Opinion columnist joining us from London. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York State, giving the daily briefing on the state of the coronavirus in the state. Let's take a listen.
Let's give you some facts today. My man, Sergeant Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am. My daughters say nobody understands who Joe Friday is. That's their mistake. Dragnet was an underappreciated cinematic treasure, in my opinion. Joe Friday, just the facts, just the facts. Here are just the facts. Hospitalization rate is down from 18,000 to 17,000 mark. That is good news. Total hospitalizations down. We talk about the flattening of the curve, the apex. How long is it flat? When does it start the curve? We don't know, but this is positive news. 3-day average, which again is more accurate than the day-to-day counts. I'm a little skeptical about the day-to-day counts. This is all a new reporting system, but the 3-day average is more reliable. ICU admissions number is also down significantly for the first time, so that's good news. Intubations is down, and that's really good news because the intubations ultimately lead to the worst news. 80% roughly of people who get intubated never come off the ventilator. The number of new people who are diagnosed with COVID, about 2,000 still yesterday. So when you see the reduction in rates, remember what we're talking about. We're talking about a reduction in increases. You still have 2,000 people every day about who are walking into a hospital for the first time or who are being diagnosed with COVID for the first time. And 2,000 is still a lot of people. But the good news is it means we can control the virus, right? We can control the spread. And we did not know for sure that we could do that. We speculated that we could do it, but we didn't know. So now we know that we can control this disease. The bad news is 2,000 people walked into a hospital yesterday for the first time with the disease. And the worst news is 600 people died yesterday from the disease. That is still continuing at a really tragic rate. Of those deaths, 577 in hospitals, 29 in nursing homes. We've been watching the nursing homes because nursing homes in many ways are ground zero for this situation. Last night, the number in nursing homes was relatively low. Everyone asks the same two questions. When is it over? And how do we get there? How do we start to make our way from here to there? When is it over? As I've said, when is it finally over? It's over when you have a vaccine, and that's 12 months to 18 months. We've said to the FDA, any way we can be helpful in the testing of that vaccine, how do we accelerate that? How do we expedite it? New York is ready, willing, and able to do that with the FDA. Maybe there's a medical treatment between now and the vaccine. That would be great. But those are unknowns, and it's out of our bailiwick. We are working with a lot of companies that are working on treatments. We're testing treatments in our hospitals, but that's a pure medical research and development function, which is beyond us. At the same time, how do we unpause New York? New York is now on pause. How do we unpause it? First, do no harm. Don't let that infection rate go up to the best of your ability. Don't lose the progress that you have made. Second, now go back that we have some stability and we can actually work with the healthcare system, which we had on overdrive for many, many weeks. And we had increased the capacity, as you remember. Every hospital had to increase capacity 50%. I mean, just think about that. 50% more beds, staffing those beds during this horrific period. Now we have a chance to be more intelligent, frankly, about handling our healthcare system. Testing and tracing, testing and tracing, testing and tracing, and we need the federal government to work with us on that. And then phasing an economic return to the quote-unquote new normal, right? Those are all activities that are going on at the same time, and that's our plan to quote-unquote unpause New York. You stopped everything. How do you now restart that machine in a coordinated way that doesn't drive up the infection rate? That's the balance that we're trying to strike. On unpausing and having businesses open, that is a nuanced question. There's no light switch. It's not all businesses go back tomorrow. It's what businesses, what do they do, what risks do they pose, and what changes can they make in their business to make them more safe. This is not just government deciding. It's government deciding with private businesses who now have to take a look at this new normal, this new reality, and tell us how they think they can adjust to it. One of our questions in evaluations is, how essential is that business service, right? You have to start somewhere. Right now we have the economy working with what are quote-unquote essential workers. That's why the grocery store is open. That's why public transit is running. All right, so we want to start to bring the economy back, move up one tranche on how you define essential. What's the next level of essential businesses? Are there certain businesses that are inherently safer or can be safer? And then let's talk about how we reopen them and where we reopen them. And these are all questions that we have to work through on a case-by-case basis. But there is a matrix. And the matrix is how important is the business to society, how essential is service, and how risky is that business from a rate of infection. And obviously, the more essential a business, the lower the risk, the more they are a priority. And then how do you do it? You do it in phases of priority, and then you phase it up the way we phased it down which is by percentages. And this is going to be an ongoing process over the coming weeks that we're working through with the other states. But the what, the how, the when, looking at how important that business is and what the risk that business poses. And then do it in coordination with our other states, because this is really a regional issue and it should be addressed on that basis. Coordinating with the other states doesn't mean we'll always be in lockstep, but we'll talk through everything first, and hopefully we're not doing something that's contradictory to another state at a minimum. And so far, so good on that exercise. And then analysis is ongoing. But it's not going to be all about what government does. The private sector now has to think about what they do and how they do it and how they can do it differently in this new normal. Reimagine your workplace. And we learned a lot through this situation. People worked from home. Well, how many people can continue to work from home and the business still work? How do you socially distance in the workplace? Can you socially distance in your workplace? What are your new normal procedures and practices? How do you think you're going to get workers back and forth? And what precautions would you take? In the workplace, how would people work, and where would they sit, or where would they stand? And how do you do it without conference meetings? And how do you do it without gatherings? How are you going to interact with the public in a way that keeps the public safe, right? We're talking about businesses that pose a lower risk. Tell us how you intend to organize and conduct your business. And can you do it in a way that poses a lower risk? And what would you do with your workforce to make sure if an infection happens that we can jump on it quickly? And then as we're going through all this planning, this is going to be a moment of transformation for society. And we paid a very high price for it. But how do we learn the lessons so that this new normal is a better New York? And there are lessons that we must learn from this, because we do need to do things differently, or we can do things differently, and we can do things better. Part of the way across that bridge is testing. It is the single best tool to inform decisions and to calibrate all of this. This new testing world is a new frontier for all of us. New York State has been very aggressive about doing testing. We set a very ambitious goal when we began, and I'm happy to say they did it. We've done 500,000 tests in 30 days. That's more than California, Florida, and Michigan combined. And this is all about figuring it out first and taking a system that frankly didn't exist and creating this testing system and this testing regimen. 500,000 tests in 1 month. That sounds great, and it was great. It was a great accomplishment. And congratulations to everyone who put it together. But when you think of 500,000 tests in 1 month, and then you compare it to the fact that you have 19 million people in the state, you have 9 million workers, the 500,000 doesn't sound so big, right? So we have many questions to answer. Where do you test? How do you get the supplies? How do you coordinate the private labs? How do you coordinate the demand going to these private labs, right? Everybody wants testing. Private sector companies are calling for testing, and they're going right to the labs. Everyone is going right to these labs, and 50 states are competing, and the federal government is buying product from these labs. This has to be figured out, and it can only be figured out in partnership with the federal government. On top of that, once you go from testing, you have to trace every person who comes up positive. Trace means investigate. Investigate all those prior contacts. And then one contact, you test that person, leads you to another person. So the tracing investigators are really assembling an army that does not now exist. I spoke to the White House again this morning about it. I understand that this is a problematic area and the federal government's not eager to get involved in testing. I get that. But the plain reality here is we have to do it in partnership with the federal government. You're talking about supply chains that go back to China. A state does not have the capacity to do that. And there's no reason why you would have 50 states each trying to figure this out on their own, competing with the federal government, competing with the private sector. So I'm very much looking forward to the federal government's willingness to tackle this, understanding that it will be imperfect at best. But if we work together, we can do better than any of us could do alone. And that's what this is all about. You're not going to achieve optimum performance. You can't put together this national system with perfection. So people are understandably reluctant to get involved. But understanding the risk and understanding that it's never going to be done perfectly. If we work together, we can do better. And that's what we have to actually accomplish. We have to strengthen the healthcare system. Our surge in Flex, which is the first time we've ever called upon all these hospitals to work together and coordinate. Every hospital was basically its own enterprise. And then we go back and say, well, you all have to work together and coordinate, and we're going to help you coordinate. It was first time that's ever happened. We understand about a stockpile like we've never understood before. We understand about sharing resources like we've never understood before. And we understand about sharing among states and how good people were to New York when we needed it, and states stepping up and sending us ventilators. And I said, New Yorkers, don't forget, and New Yorkers are the most generous and most gracious, and we'll be there when people need help. New Jersey is still looking at their curve rising. The wave hasn't crested in New Jersey. They're our neighbors. Anything we can do to help. I've told Governor Murphy all he has to do is ask. We're here. And we're going to send 100 ventilators to New Jersey. But the key to all of this, the calibration is the infection rate. And this gets a little technical, but I need people to really understand this. Why don't you open tomorrow? Because we're afraid the infection rate will go up. And everything we've been doing is to slow the infection rate. Well, how do you track the infection rate? We don't. We don't track infection rates. We see hospitalization rates, which are different. A hospitalization rate is a person who got infected and became seriously ill, so they had to go to the hospital. But we don't know how many people have been infected or are getting infected. We only know at this point how many people walk into a hospital, okay? Or how many people get tested in a nursing home. If you have advanced testing, then you'll have a better idea what % of your population has actually been exposed. That's what the antibody testing is all about. But the key is, as you're making this calibration on the reopening of the economy, as you're bringing more people out of their homes, how fast is that virus spreading and how quickly is that infection rate rising, right? Dr. Fauci said early on that this virus spreads. It does it very well. And we know that, and we've learned it the hard way. The rate of infection is everything, okay? All those early projection models assumed a higher rate of infection, a higher rate of spread. That's why they were calling for so many more hospital beds, many more mortalities, because they projected a higher rate of spread. That has not happened so far. Caveat so far. We've controlled the beast. We've brought the rate of spread down. If their rate of spread actually happened, we would have been in a much, much worse situation, and we would have been in a really bad place. I mean, their projections were staggering. And it didn't happen because we slowed the models. But remember what they were talking about. CDC, which is supposed to be the preeminent source, 160 million to 214 million people infected, they were projecting. That was only March 13th. That's what the CDC was projecting. You know how many 160 to 214 million are? We only have 328 million people in the country. They were projecting more than half of the population, and maybe 2/3 of the population infected.
We're listening
and that was
to
only
Andrew
a month
Cuomo,
ago.
the governor of New York State, give a daily briefing on the coronavirus, talking about the path behind us and the path forward as New York State tries to imagine what life will be like going forward. He made clear it would not look the way that it had in the past. And I think that pretty much everybody is saying the same thing, Paul, which is basically get used to a new normal, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I think what a lot of people find comforting about Governor Cuomo and his daily briefings that it's the consistency and the factual nature of it, and trying to put it all into context as well as bringing it down to the individual personal level. So I think one of the statistics that he typically leads off with is the total number of hospitalizations, and that rate of increase continues to be favorable. So kind of suggesting that kind of bending that curve is beginning to happen in the state of New York.
Yeah, New Jersey, not so much, saying that over there they have not yet seen the peak. Paul, I got to say, it's been a slew of pretty depressing news this morning.
That's right.
And the economic data just keeps getting more and more depressing. And I do want to reprise the dad joke of the day just because I'm trying to sort of cling on to something. So I'll give you this one from one listener. What did the big chimney say to the little chimney?
Oh, I've heard this before, but I can't remember. Give it to me.
You're too young to smoke.
That's right. All right, I like that one.
All right, what's your rating?
No, that's a 9. That's a classic one.
That's a 9. And folks, we laugh about dad and I'll say mom jokes as well. But we're surrounded by our children right now, as all of us who are able and privileged enough to work from home are, as they try to homeschool themselves. Well, I say homeschool themselves because clearly I'm absconding my duties. But try to adapt to this new normal on a variety of different media, including perhaps Netflix. Right now, taking a look at markets, we are seeing that all the major indexes are higher. The NASDAQ up nearly 2%, the S&P up 0.8%, the Dow basically flat, as people look past a dismal earnings season toward perhaps some sign that maybe we're reaching stabilization and finding a bit of a bottom here. I'm Lisa Abramowitz, along with my co-host and colleague Paul Sweeney, driving the conversation forward. Bloomberg Balance of Power up next. This is Bloomberg Radio.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local listings.
The Woj Pod with Adrian Wojnarowski.
Doris, you had reason to believe that you needed to get a test for the coronavirus.
Right. Well, let's just start with the headline, which is I did test positive for COVID-19. I was so tired from Saturday the 14th through Tuesday, March 17th. I kid you not, I could not be out of bed for 5 minutes without needing to go back to bed and lay down.
Search the Woj Pod to listen.
Get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft with TuneIn.
Do your homework on this year's top prospects, rising stars, and late-round sleepers with football podcasts like Move the Sticks.
Is my pick because I know he is an athletic freak, a guy that is capable of doing it all. He can blitz, he can run, he can cover.
And when the draft gets underway on April 23rd, follow every round and every pick for free.
In the 2018 NFL.
It's always football season on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the Bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks, Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one, not only.
Catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn. Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a podcast on TuneIn. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
At Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, this is Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston, and welcome. We always start with the markets. We had a rough day in equities yesterday. Today, the question is, are they going to continue it, or can they break the pattern? And for a report, we turn now to Abigail Doolittle. Abigail?
Well, David, it's sort of unclear at this point whether or not we will break that pattern of down markets. Right now, mixed, although it does feel as though the buyers are trying to step up. Very jittery in the first hour of trading. Actually, right now, we are all green. Take a look at that. The Dow unchanged, basically flat, but the S&P 500 at session highs up 0.8%. And the NASDAQ up 2%, really outperforming on that FANG strength, big tech, those momentum stocks, especially Amazon, carving out a new record high. Investors going toward those stocks, that momentum complex. But the question is, David, more recently, the buying power, as shown by this week, 2 down days, 1 up day, right, for sure. Today, it's not entirely clear, although it does seem as though it would be up. The buyers are less enthusiastic. We've had horrible economic data coming out, so investors, traders really assessing that reality. It's no longer just somewhere in the distance. It is here today. Many folks are saying that it's going to be the second quarter that's really going to matter. Some are saying that this rally has to do with traders looking past 2020 into 2021. But if the data continues to come out so poorly, it could be a problem.
So, Abigail, it's not clear what the economic data are telling investors right now. Are they paying attention to the earnings? Because we're really getting into the heart now of earnings season.
They certainly are paying attention to the earnings, David. And I think that this is another wake-up call. The banks this week really down in a big way, down more than 10%. And all of the big banks reporting disappointing profits, just absolutely plunging, bigger loan loss reserves than expected. Trading is a bright spot, but Morgan Stanley this morning saying they're not sure how long that will last. So this is the reality. In March, when it was clear that this coronavirus crisis was going to create tremendous economic problems, everybody expecting it to hit earnings, especially as so many companies were withdrawing guidance. But here we have these big banks putting up the worst numbers in years, the loan loss reserve similar to what we had out of the financial crisis. So the new reality is setting in, setting a bearish tone, these banks, for the rest of earnings season. But it will be very important to see what some of the other sectors report, especially tech, because again, tech on the day, and more recently, tech has been a bright spot holding up the markets. But the tone right now, a bit cautious. Investors do want to see what this is going to look like for the first quarter. But again, many folks out there saying that it is the second quarter that's going to be more important. But certainly right now we're getting an early tell on that relative to what March looked like, David.
Okay, Abigail, thank you so very much. That's Abigail Doolittle on the markets. We want to get the investor's perspective now on the economy. For that, we turned to Afsani Beschloss. She is CEO of Rock Creek Group. She's also a regular contributor, I'm pleased to say, to Wall Street Week. Welcome, Afsani. Great to have you here. We got some jobless numbers out today. It continues the pattern now. We have over 20 million people who have lost their jobs in the last 3 weeks or so. What do you make out of the economic numbers? Are they different from what investors really expected at this point?
Great to be with you, David, today. The numbers were more pessimistic than the market expected today. It's interesting that the market itself has not reacted as negatively to those numbers so far as we would have expected. But the interesting thing about the numbers that we saw is that they do not show the negativity of many CEOs and CFOs that we've been talking to and polling. And if you talk to a lot of CFOs right now, what they're seeing is that even if we come back at the end of Q2 or have a relatively more positive outcome, we still will have less employment coming out of this than people expect. So I have seen numbers that are up to 10 to 30% less employees when we stabilize. So that will have a very big impact on the longer term markets, but also the economy.
Are we looking at the possibility of a somewhat jobless recovery then, Afsani?
Well, it may not be jobless, but it will be at a lower level of employment than I think most people expect. What we're seeing is both the CFOs of the largest companies not seeing employment come back to quite where it was after this crisis, but also, as we've seen with the PPP and the programs for the smaller businesses, those businesses are finding that it has been very difficult to actually get access to the PPPs, which have now been all fully allocated. And unless we get another batch of it, it's not going to be very helpful. Plus, it seems like the market is talking about a lot of bigger firms having had better access to the PPPs than the true moms and pops or the smaller enterprises. So again, from an employment point, it's not clear either for the larger companies or the smaller companies that were hoping to get access to the PPPs, that their employment numbers will come up as we expected. The other thing that I think is worth looking at is that, for example, in China, what the government has done is actually just push out cash through Alipay to every Chinese person or most Chinese people. So you get a cash account on your Alipay and you can buy goods with it. You actually have to exit your home. You can't order online. You have to go out, and they're trying to get people to normalize behavior, to go out on the streets to buy a cup of coffee, to get a meal, and maybe even go to the movies or whatever. But we don't really have that. We're not really accessing the end consumer through the programs we've got in the U.S.
Afsani, you know a lot about oil and energy. That's where you started out as an expert in that area. What about this report that the government may actually pay oil producers to keep their oil on the ground, sort of have the strategic petroleum reserve reside in the ground? Does that make sense?
You know, it's cheaper to do that sometimes than storage, especially we're running out of storage space in the U.S., but also outside the U.S. So I think, you know, if you assume that energy is oil and gas are not renewable, in fact, it means that if you keep your stock and its value goes up over a very long time, it may not be exactly the most stupid program to have. It's not exactly a common plan that the DOE has had in the past. Most of the time, I think we have expected that our storage spaces would be available and be able to do the same thing as we're talking about. Also, because all the tankers that are out on the ocean are also getting full, and most likely by sometime in April or May they will be full. We might have to stop producing, in which case there will have to be some sort of program if we want to support the industry domestically. Whether this is the way to do it, or another way might be to help the companies with their credit programs and things like that, might be more sensible.
You mentioned the possibility of the employment situation not coming fully back. And you look at the oil industry, are we looking at the possibility of some long-term, even maybe permanent changes in the structure of the industry? For example, in the shale oil producers down in the oil patch, they are really hurting. I'm not sure they'll fully come back.
You're absolutely right, David. On the other hand, I think what we're seeing, which is very surprising, some of the numbers we've been seeing this week, in fact, is that renewable energy now has reached about just over 20% of our total power grid in the U.S. And in fact, the Lone Star State, Texas, is a hub of not just oil and gas, the way we think about it, but they have been building a quarter of all new solar capacity that has been installed in the U.S., which may come as a surprise to most people who think of Texas just as an oil and gas economy. So on the one hand, you see that employment in one part of the energy sector is going down, but the employment potential for renewable energy might be going up at the same time. And the question is, will the renewables survive and actually thrive as energy prices stay lower?
In a world in which we have much more renewable energy and less of the fossil fuels, does that require as much employment? Because we can see, for example, in the auto industry, electric vehicles don't require the same number of workers as internal combustion engines.
It might be that, the cars themselves don't, but or they're, manufactured differently. But at the same time, installing capacity, let's say solar on top of your house or in industries, it still is relatively, it does need labor, a different kind of labor, maybe trained in a different way. All the parts and all the services that you need for renewables also, or clean water, or anything climate-related also, will generate a lot of employment. In fact, as we speak, I would dare to say that the services part related to renewables is experiencing a problem with getting all the access to good labor and experienced labor, because we don't have that level of labor experience in services part of renewables and water and things like that. So there is a mismatch there, and if we can get our training programs up, we might be able to help some of these unemployment problems that we're seeing in the other parts of the energy sector. And I think I should also mention that in emerging markets, you're seeing the opposite trend, because a lot of them are energy importers. So just like in the U.S., we'll become very strong energy producer, in a lot of countries that are energy importers, they will have the opposite experience, in the sense that as their economies start coming up, they will benefit actually from these level of low energy prices, and that will in effect help their unemployment problems in the longer run.
Afsaneh, thank you so much. Delight to have you with us. That's Afsaneh Beshelah. She is CEO of the Rocket Group. And as I say, she's also a Wall Street Week contributor. A program note now, we will have Wall Street Week on again tomorrow night, that Friday evening, 6 o'clock Eastern Time, as we look back at the week that was. In the meantime, we want to go for First Word News. And for that, we turn now to Mark Crumpton.
David, the United Kingdom is extending its lockdown for another 3 weeks. The announcement was made just moments ago. UK has become the 6th country to have more than 100,000 confirmed coronavirus cases. UK says another 861 people died in the past 24 hours. The increase follows 4 days of lower numbers, but officials say that may have been because of delays in reporting over the long Easter weekend. Democrats in Congress and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will try again today to reach agreement on the next stage of an economic rescue package. Bloomberg has learned the two sides remain far apart after the first day of talks. The talks are taking place as the $349 billion federal relief program for small businesses devastated by the coronavirus pandemic has already been drained. The Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced a nationwide state of emergency. It's aimed at stopping cross-border movement of people and increase social distancing. Abe says it will stay in effect until May 6th. Japan has more than 9,000 virus cases and about 150 deaths. New York City's expecting the economy to crater because of the coronavirus. The city's budget office estimates 475,000 jobs will be lost in the next year, and tax revenue will plunge $9.7 billion through 2021. New York City's GDP for this year is now likely to decline 4.5%. The city had been expecting the economy to grow 1.8%. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. As Mark talked about, the UK talking about extending its lockdown. We've had the same thing happen now in New York, as Governor Cuomo has announced that he's going to extend till May 15 the time when we need to stay at home and stay safe. Once again, until May 15 in New York. In the meantime, President Trump is playing a high-stakes game with the governors and, for that matter, with the Democratic Party. We're going to turn to our Bloomberg political contributor. He's Rick Davis to talk about exactly what's at stake. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Market upheavals.
Okay, people, I've got the daily checklist. Who today has eaten dinner for breakfast? Tick. Started a chore you'll never finish? Tick. Done a conference call in your pajamas? Tick. Here's another for your list. BritBox. Streaming the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, and now Channel 4. All in one place and ad-free. So add BritBox to your list and get a 30-day free trial of the biggest box of British box sets. Search BritBox free trial. Tick. Biggest compared to other SVOD providers. Auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless cancelled. T's and C's apply.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out there.
Yeah, well, just
carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day, I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
For weeks, we've heard about panicked shoppers causing a run on toilet paper by irrationally hoarding it. But that ignores one key factor.
That the toilet paper you use when you leave the home is not the same toilet paper you use at home.
How incomplete information, whether about supply chains or infection rates, leads to incomplete narratives. Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC studios on TuneIn today.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip number 4, relax. Don't feel like you have to be productive during these stressful days? This is the perfect time to focus on yourself. Whether that means meditating, taking a bath, sleeping in, or doing nothing at all, take a deep breath and treat yourself. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen from Home on TuneIn.
The NFL Draft is on TuneIn.
Starting Thursday, April 23rd, ESPN Radio has you covered with live coverage, discussions, and analysis of every round.
Be there when the future stars of the NFL find their home.
And your team selects the players that will shape their future for seasons to come.
National policy that helps people get back to work and spurs the economy is going to be very difficult. He's going to have to work with these governors, all of whom have their own agendas, both as governor and trying to maintain the health and well-being of their states, but also as politicians who have a point of view on what the elections are going to be like come November.
Rick, as you suggest, it certainly looks right now, at least, like the big issue come November in the presidential election will be how this coronavirus crisis was handled. What does that pose as a difficulty for Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden, and his campaign? Because to some extent, they're almost passive in this. They can't take too much initiative. The president has the initiative. What can they do besides sit back and wait and see how it plays out?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they have as an option, is to sit back and wait and see how it plays out. I mean, to some degree, this election was always going to be about Donald Trump, right? I mean, anything Donald Trump does is all about Donald Trump. So this likely was going to stack up to be a up or down vote on his first term of office, which would not be unusual for sitting presidents. But even more so because of the pandemic, this will really be a referendum on his leadership and whether or not people feel like he's done everything he can to maintain both the health safety of America, but the economic safety of America. Biden will have a very limited ability, probably late in the game, to create a contrast with Trump. There'll be plenty to do there, but he's going to have to pick very carefully what issues that he strikes out on, because the American public, it's hard to predict what they're going to care about come September and October of this year. But we do know one thing for sure, is their health and economic security are going to be at the top of that agenda.
Well, and speaking of health, one last question. Do Republicans who resist the idea of mail-in ballots run a risk? Did we see that perhaps in Wisconsin when the Republicans really forced people to come in person to polls?
Yeah, I think this debate about vote by mail is really overheated within the Republican Party. I mean, traditionally, Republicans feel like they have a disadvantage for people who vote by mail. There was a major effort when Motor Voter was first started, which is you get registered to vote by being a licensed driver, and all these things actually just bring people to the polls. One of the states that has almost all mail-in ballots is Utah, and they do quite well as Republicans in Utah, and so I think there's a lot of heat, but no fire when it comes to vote by mail. The reality is this is going to be an intensely involved election. People are going to want to do something, and making it easy for them to do it is going to give Republicans just as much advantage to turnout as it's going to be for Democrats.
Yeah, whatever happens, it's a very different election. Rick, it's really great to have you with us. That's Rick Davis, among other things, our Bloomberg political contributor, I'm proud to say. Later on in the program, we're going to have an exclusive interview with Dallas Fed President Rob Kaplan. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
To buy your home, you became a house hunting ace, learned about loans, scoured neighborhoods, and asked the right questions. Now you're queen of your castle. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll feel empowered to own your retirement like you own your home. Go to aceyourretirement.org. Because when it comes to clearing financial hurdles, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Whether it's another day of market misery, pandemic emergency, or both, one thing will still go right.
We have the latest world and national news.
Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager bring you the most accurate coverage.
The White House is looking for additional ways to support the economy.
Bloomberg Daybreak.
We continue to watch equities around the world.
Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It is time now for Stock of the Hour. It is United Airlines, the worst performer of the day, down around 10%, more or less. And to give us a report, we turn now to Kaylee Lyons. Kaylee?
David, well, we are expecting earnings from United after the bell today. The company hasn't confirmed that, but that's what we've estimated. And clearly sentiment isn't great going into that print. The stock has already lost about 70% of its value this year, of course, due to the total collapse in air travel demand we've seen as a result of the coronavirus outbreak. Now, analysts expect United is going to lose roughly $2.60 a share this quarter. That's relative to profit of $1.13 in the same quarter last year. Obviously, these estimates have been dramatically re-rated over the course of this year. Earnings estimates for both North American carriers like United and Asia Pacific carriers have been cut by about 200% so far this year. And the issue is that it's really just not going to be a first quarter only problem. What's really driving the losses today for United is a letter that was sent by CEO Oscar Munoz and President Scott Kirby to employees last night, basically signaling that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. They said travel demand is essentially zero and shows no signs of improving in the near term. They actually expect demand to remain suppressed for the remainder of 2020 and into next year. To give you some perspective as to how suppressed that demand is, they say that United will fly fewer people during the entire month of May this year than it did on a single day in May last year, David.
Yeah, and to give you some sense, Kelly, you probably heard this number. In New York area, they reported that the air traffic was down something like 96% at the airlines around here. At the same time, there's help in the form of government bailout, right? They've come to terms?
They have gotten some help. United specifically is getting about $5 billion in grants and loans, and that does help from a short-term liquidity standpoint, and it's really focused on payroll costs, but that's only about 30% of United's total costs, so that means they're still going to have to make deep cuts elsewhere. Really, analysts weren't that happy with the government program, given the fact that airlines are on the hook to repay about 30% of the money they get, and frankly, it isn't enough to offset the demand problem, even with government aid, David.
Okay, Kaylee, thank you so much for that report on Stock of the Hour, which is United Airlines. That's Kaylee Lyons. Coming up here, we're going to talk with Representative Catherine Clark of Massachusetts about what's going on up on Capitol Hill as they're stalled over appropriating more money for small business. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Another week of disappointing jobs data. About 5.25 million first-time jobless claims were filed last week. That brings the total number of claims to around 22 million since the middle of last month, wiping out all of the job gains in over the past 10 years. Meanwhile, the Federal Emergency Loan Program for small businesses is now out of money. Congress has included $349 billion for small businesses in its $2.2 trillion relief package. It's been active for only 2 weeks. Well, Verizon wants in on the Zoom boom. It's going to buy a Zoom rival, Blue Jeans Network, for $500 million. On Wall Street, the Dow is falling 45 points, but the Nasdaq is up 143. S&P 500 up 15 points. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
In these times of loss and crisis, the people you trust to ask the questions you need answered become even more vital.
Should the president, though, impose the Defense Production Act?
Carol Masser and Jason Kelly.
Help us understand what we know so far.
Bloomberg Business Week.
They are on the front line of the impact of the coronavirus.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Congress has already passed 3 major pieces of legislation to try to help the U.S. economy, including that $2 trillion spending package. But we're told that as of today, we are already running out of the $350 billion that was appropriated to help small businesses. And attempts to try to replenish that have stalled up on Capitol Hill. We welcome now Congresswoman Catherine Clark. She's Democrat of Massachusetts. She sits on the Appropriations Committee. She also is the vice chair of the Democratic caucus, which makes her one of the members who's in leadership. So, Representative Clark, thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with that attempt to try to replenish some of the money for small business. Where does it sit?
Yeah, as of today, we know that the Paycheck Protection Program is likely to run out of money. And we have been working to get the Senate to support our interim emergency package that would replenish that program with $250 billion in additional assistance and would focus half of that amount to make sure that our women-owned businesses, our veteran-owned businesses, farmers, rural communities, and underserved communities have better access to those funds. In addition, we want to make sure that we are continuing to support our hospitals, community health centers, and health systems, and an additional $150 billion for state and local municipalities. We know this is a healthcare crisis first, and if we want to help our small businesses and keep the focus on our workers who have been displaced, we have to address the healthcare crisis simultaneously. And that's what the Democrats are pushing for, and we certainly hope that the Republicans will join us and that Secretary Mnuchin will understand that these two things can't be separated and need to be taken up as soon as possible in Congress.
Is this an either or is there room for compromise here? Because there certainly is an urgency for all of the things you're talking about, both for the replenishing of the money for the small businesses as well as money for hospitals and states.
Yeah, I mean, we believe that these go hand in glove. We cannot restart our economy. We cannot get the aid out that workers around the country need if we do not have the hospital and community health centers and the assistance to states who are expending, just records amount of funding, providing these life-saving services to Americans. And so these all go together, and we cannot just give aid to our small businesses if we're not also taking care of the hospitals and healthcare systems that are supporting those people. This is first and foremost a public health crisis, and we have to continue to address that as we support the backbone of our economy, which is our small businesses.
Yeah, even as we're speaking, Congresswoman, and we're told that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, says that she's still negotiating over additional relief funding. You're, as I say, a member of leadership on the Democratic side, Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, as well as on the Appropriations Committee. Given what you know up there, do you think this is going to get resolved? And if so, within what frame of time?
We certainly hope that it will be resolved today and voted on as quickly as possible. That is what Democrats have been pushing throughout this process, as we have been taking the lead on ensuring that we make these emergency relief bills tailored and aimed at the needs of Americans. And first and most pressing are their health needs, getting the protective equipment, making sure that we have the ventilators, ensuring that we are expanding testing to meet the needs. We don't always have a cooperative partner in the White House, and we are alarmed at some of the misinformation and an eagerness to open this economy before it could be safe to do so. So we are going to continue to press that we do both things at the same time. Recognize that this is a health crisis and that people in my district continue to be, and across the country, primarily concerned with preventing their families from getting this virus and helping those in their communities who are already struggling with it. And we want to support those first responders and healthcare workers and grocery store workers who are at the front line. But we have to do both. We have to make sure that our small businesses are not destroyed during this pandemic, and that they have what they need to be able to reopen when we can securely do so. So we are ready to act with the urgency that is required, and we hope the Senate will join us today.
And finally, Congresswoman, you mentioned your district. Give us a sense of what's going on there. We listen to Charlie Baker, your governor, pretty much every day at a news conference. It feels like things are getting worse. Give us your sense of what's going on in your district.
Here in Massachusetts, we have been dreading this time period. It appears that we are now in the surge of cases, hospitalizations, and unfortunately and tragically from deaths. We crossed a gruesome milestone of the loss of 1,000 people, and we have surpassed that already today. here in the Commonwealth. And one of my communities, Revere, Massachusetts, is one of the top 10 in the state in deaths per capita. And so we are struggling. But we are also seeing inspirational heroism with our first responders, with our public and private entities coming together to help support our communities in this very, very challenging time. So, as always, I'm very proud to represent this district that is on the forefront of trying to stay home, to wear our masks in public, to do whatever we can to slow this infection rate, and investing in research and finding a cure and a vaccine, which I think very much will be the innovation that we're going to see to help us address this virus that's going to come out of my district in many ways. And so it's really the best of times and the worst of times here in Massachusetts.
Indeed. Well, I know all of our thoughts are with you, Congresswoman, and your constituents. Thank you so much. That's Congresswoman Catherine Clark. She is a Democrat of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And now it's time for First Word News, and for that we go to Mark Crumpton. Mark?
David, thank you. Italy is reporting its highest new coronavirus cases in 4 days. The government says there were more than 3,700 new cases, over 1,000 more than the day before. Italy now has nearly 169,000 confirmed virus cases. The Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, is working with emergency task forces to map a restart for businesses who are being crushed by the nationwide lockdown. China is denying allegations that the coronavirus pandemic may have started in a lab near the city of Wuhan, where contagious samples were being stored. China also denies it delayed announcing the outbreak and underreported cases. The virus is widely believed to have originated with bats and to have been passed from another species to humans at a so-called wet market in Wuhan. A firm determination has not been made. The Kremlin says that Russia will gratefully accept President Trump's offer to provide ventilators for coronavirus patients. The president said Wednesday the U.S. was ready to send ventilators to Russia, saying, quote, "They're having a hard time in Moscow. We're going to help them." He added the U.S. also stands ready to provide ventilators to other countries, including Italy, Spain, and France. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. Coming up here next, we're going to have an exclusive interview with Dallas Fed President Robert Kaplan. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
What began in China.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I went up high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you. The best sports story all day, 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week. ESPN Daily.
Search ESPN Daily to listen.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, we'll look at race, politics, and the pandemic.
Social distancing is critical, but you have to have a certain class position, really, to be able to fully engage that practice.
I'll talk with Kianga Yamada-Taylor. Listen to this episode of the New Yorker Radio Hour on TuneIn today.
The NFL Draft is on TuneIn.
Starting Thursday, April 23rd, ESPN Radio has you covered with live coverage, discussions, and analysis of every round.
Be there when the future stars of the NFL find their home.
And your team selects the players that will shape their future for seasons to come.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Be part of the sports conversation with Sports Talk Radio on TuneIn. Join the discussion around your favorite local teams with sports stations broadcasting in your area.
The game will be 185 to 183 and somebody wins, whatever. Football, it's either full go or it's not. You got like, oh, it's thud. I can practice what they call
Follow
thud.
national storylines and debates with ESPN Radio.
Does the NBA have a hiring problem when it comes to front office jobs in the leagues and a minority hiring issue? Stephen A. chimed in on that today on First Take.
It also resonates with me. Max, you can appreciate this position. One of the candidates was Brian Colangelo. We know what happened. I like Brian, but we know.
And hear what's happening worldwide with international channels like Talk Sport.
Seems as I'm sort of doing my life in reverse at the moment. I was on cricket tours when I was 20 years old, and now I'm 31. I'm out sat at home injured playing PlayStation. So it's a tournament basically where you create your own character.
In your backyard and around the globe. Keep your finger on the pulse of the sports world with TuneIn. Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
round the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike. Just to go over the first couple of picks, Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Second half of the year from the levels we're at, we're still going to have a 4 to 5% contraction for the year. But then the question will be, what's the pace of growth and what's the state of the U.S. consumer? Those are the questions, and that's the issue I'm most worried about.
And the psychology of the U.S. consumer, it strikes me, is not simply being somewhat more conservative because they got burned in a downturn, but also being concerned about their personal safety. How willing are people going to be to go back out, even when they're allowed to do it, to go to restaurants, to go out and spend, to really participate in the economy? Will there be some reluctance just because of personal safety concerns?
Yeah, so there's three levels of issue with the consumer. One is personal safety, as you mentioned. This is why ubiquity of testing is so critical. If you had widespread testing at scale, I think that would do a lot to give consumers confidence to go into the workplace, to go out to restaurants, to go into other public gatherings. But that's very much dependent on how available is rapid testing. The other two issues are job insecurity. I just saw a survey from the New York Fed that said something like 70% of all workers are worried about their jobs, about losing their jobs. So there's that insecurity. And then the last issue is just what's happened to the consumer financially, and particularly that segment of the population, which is sizable, that doesn't have much savings and lives from paycheck to paycheck. and this is going to make it so they're even more cautious. So those are the three big issues that affect the consumer.
As we look at the models that you all run at the Fed, is it likely this pandemic will actually affect the potential growth for the United States? I mean, I think before it was probably around 2%, more or less. Does this take that number down somewhat going out into the out years?
Yeah, it may, and so we'll have some snapback growth in 2021. We'll grow faster than potential next year. We'll grow at a higher rate. If potential's 2%, we think we're going to grow a lot faster than 2% because we're making up for what happened this year. But after you get into the future, there's two things that drive potential growth. One is growth in the workforce, and the second is growth in productivity. And the concern I'd have is you have a number of people that are going to lose their jobs and are going to have to find new jobs. Some of them who are older, it's possible will decide to retire, i.e. just withdraw from the workforce. Others will need to get retrained. Some will find it hard to find other jobs. So workforce growth, as we're running down the unemployment rate, you would expect a good rate of workforce growth. As we run that down, though, we had a workforce growth issue coming into this because we're aging. Demographics were such we already had a workforce growth challenge, and we're going to have to relook at that, and that means job training. It also means revisiting a sensitive subject, immigration, appropriate immigration, ways to grow the workforce, and then the second issue is productivity, and I've talked a lot about that here at the Fed. The U.S. going into this lagged the world in math, science, and reading. We ranked 25th out of 35 industrialized nations. And while we've beefed up skills training, we also are not doing it fast enough to keep up with the changes with technology and technology-enabled disruption. So, and you also worry about, will the level of government debt squeeze out some private investment in CapEx? So we're going to have to address all those issues, and I know we can, so that we can grow faster. But otherwise, yes, potential growth could slip. And we already thought going into this crisis, we were concerned that potential growth was going to erode over the years because of those drivers I just talked about.
How much could it slip, do you think?
Well, my concern, if you talked to me in January, I would have said that potential growth in the United States maybe is 1.75% to 2%. And what is that made up of? Let's say 0.5% in workforce growth, and let's call it 1.25% to 1.5% growth in productivity. If we still got to address the workforce growth issue because of aging, and so that hasn't changed. And then the issue is productivity going to get better or worse? And so we already thought in January, if you'd asked me, that over the next 5 years, we could see potential growth slide from 1.75% to 2% to closer to 1.5% to 1.75%, heavily due to demographics, by the way. And then the question in our minds was, could productivity improvements make up for it? I've still got the same concern.
Let's talk about specifically your district, because it's right in the middle of the oil patch. The oil industry is really taking it really on the chin right now. Give us a sense how you evaluate the effect on your district and the economy in your district, not just from the producers themselves, but also all the service providers and things like that. There's a lot of jobs involved in oil exploration and development.
So the oil business and related businesses is roughly about now 9% of Texas GDP. That might surprise people. But over the last 25, 30 years, the state has grown dramatically, and we've diversified into a number of other industries. But even with that percentage, 9%, this is as everybody knows, extremely difficult time for the oil business. Why? The price of oil is down dramatically because of oversupply, and it's not economic for a lot of producers to produce. So what they're doing is they're shutting in production. They're stopping production. You'll see a number of failures in the industry, and people just can't make it through this. And then for the service providers, they're obviously suffering because there's less production. And so we even before this crisis had expected CapEx in the energy sector to be down 10 to 15% this year. It's going to be down dramatically more. and obviously there's going to be job losses. The big issue in the short run, though, is even though when you look at your screen, you see the quoted price of Brent and WTI West Texas crude, the local price is even lower. And why? Because we've got so much oversupply, we're on the verge of running out of storage. And so if we actually fill up the storage where there's no place to sell the product, you'll actually see the local market prices being well below the quoted market prices. So that makes it even worse for producers, where they just can't make a profit at these levels. And that's where we are right now. Now, after we get people back to work and we start to resume appropriate consumption, some of this excess is going to take several months to work off and into next year, and then you'll get to a more balanced market. But right now we have an extraordinarily imbalanced market, and that even takes into account the recent deal between Saudi Arabia and OPEC Plus. It just wasn't enough to overcome the huge amount of daily oversupply we have right now.
There's a limit to what the Fed can do to address that. Is this a time for fiscal intervention? And it could be either out-and-out bailouts, or now we have reports that maybe the government's thinking about essentially paying producers to keep the oil in the ground, sort of a strategic petroleum reserve in the ground. Do things like that make sense? Well,
I'll leave it to the fiscal authorities to make those decisions. The point of it is we're getting to the point where there's nowhere for the production to go. There's dramatically reduced demand, and there's nowhere for the production to go, and so I could see why the government is considering incentives to encourage producers to produce less, because all it's going to do is fill up the tanks faster and cause the price to plummet even further. So this is an extraordinary situation. It'll eventually work itself through, particularly once we get the economy back turned on. But in the near term, I talk regularly to people in the industry. They've never seen anything like this, and because they've never seen the demand destruction that we're seeing. So I could see where extraordinary steps to keep those tanks from being filled up could well be appropriate.
The Fed has done an awful lot already. It did last week. It took a lot of people's breath away. What's next? I mean, we've had now Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, suggest maybe there should be loans made to mortgage tenders, to things like nonprofits and things. Would you be in favor of expanding out the lending facilities to other sectors?
So what's going on right now at the Fed is we're standing up a number of these facilities. So we've announced a number, and a number are already up and running, and some of them have been announced but are not up and running. So we're furiously working around the clock here at the Fed to get a number of these facilities set up to where money is being dispersed. Then beyond that, to your question, we're continuing to look for pockets of the economy that have been overlooked in what we're doing, and through no fault of their own are under stress. And so I would say my own mindset would be we should be open-minded about continuing to look for areas, whether it's nonprofits would be a good example. The issue of mortgage servicers is something obviously that's under a lot of stress. What our goal is to have appropriate market functioning, and the other thing our goal is to keep intact to the maximum extent possible businesses and nonprofits that went into this healthy and only are under stress because of this situation, and we would like to do what we can to help them come out the other side and continue to function. So I think in that vein, I'd be open-minded about what else we might need to do.
Which takes us exactly to a really challenging point, that so-called moral hazard. The ones who came into it healthy through no fault of their own, they're under stress, as opposed to some who came in not so healthy. Sometimes you have to bail out both. You have to help both just to get this through it. Are you concerned about the moral hazard, and how do we come back off of that and return to a world where you are rewarded for prudence and you're not rewarded for the opposite?
So I am concerned about that, and that's why on the corporate corporate bond program, we've sort of set a cutoff of I think March 22nd, March 23rd. If you were investment grade on that date, you're in the program. So that will include some fallen angels, i.e. companies that were investment grade but have been downgraded. We have said that we will buy high yield ETFs, but that's going to be in relatively small size, and it's intended to help market functioning. But yes, I am concerned about, from the Fed's point of view at least, intervening in help in businesses where they were leveraged going into this, and we are taking action in those cases. I think that's really an issue for the fiscal authorities to decide, and that's really their judgment. I don't see that being the Fed doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert Kaplan, president of the Dallas Fed. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury in the time of coronavirus. Vince McMahon's XFL, the upstart football league that twice promised fans a reinvented game, has landed in bankruptcy court with plans to sell off some of the $50 million in assets just weeks after suspending its comeback season. The league had broadcast agreements with Fox and ESPN and promised to embrace new technology and gambling in a novel way. It only played 5 weeks, half its regular season, before shutting down. Even virtual races carry real-world consequences for NASCAR drivers. Driver Kyle Larson was fired Tuesday from Chip Ganassi Racing after he used a racial slur, while Bubba Wallace lost a sponsor when he rage quit an e-NASCAR event in the middle of the race. At a time when there aren't press conferences and media scrums, athletes competing on open microphones from home, constantly mic'd up through cameras or gaming headsets, can give fans a glimpse into their personalities, for good or bad. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
You're living in a world built on science, political and economic.
You've got to believe the labor market gets hit.
Computer and medical.
Clarify where we are on a test.
It all makes a difference.
What do you think needs to happen in terms of governmental response?
And it's all here.
He expects the virus to peak quite a long time from now.
Get your science straight.
The hand-washing campaign, is this actually a good strategy?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg. The world is listening.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Vatsal Shah is Senior Project Engineer at Mott MacDonald, a global engineering consultancy with more than 16,000 employees. He earned his PhD at New Jersey Institute of Technology, and as an adjunct professor, is helping NJIT students explore emerging technologies.
My focus is renewable markets, emerging technologies, the idea of floating cities. What are we doing to develop that? What will happen to the city on the water? Well, you're going to have waves hitting it. You're going to have solar. How are you going to develop plants? How are you going to develop vegetation and farming? That sort of thought process happens at NJIT. We actually plan out what will the city look like. How do we develop that? So in 10 years, we're actually ready to take on those challenges when we have our first development in the water. NJIT also has been doing a lot of work in self-healing materials, so taking the polymers and the new material that we have in our material sciences departments and putting them into things like concrete, things like steel, reinforcing our soil.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pelota. Mixed Thursday, the Dow, the S&P, they are both lower. Little changed on the S&P. NASDAQ is higher. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 55 points, up 0.7%. S&P is down 4. That is a drop of about 0.2%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 194 points, lower now by 0.8%. At the worst level of the day, the Dow had been down 292, down 1.3%. At the best level, the Dow have been up 62. Bottom line, stocks getting whipsawed amid unemployment and housing data showing the brutal impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the U.S. economy. Morgan Stanley shares, they are trading lower now, down by 0.3% after the bank reported wealth management net revenue of $4 billion, missing analyst estimates of $4.31 billion. The 10-year up 8/32 with a yield of 0.60%. Gold is down 0.3% at $17.12 the ounce. ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1%, now at $19.67 a barrel. And with more on commodities trading, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
Crude prices may have seen an uptick, but they're still near 18-year lows, anchored near $20 a barrel. Concerns over virus-led demand destruction outweigh an agreement by the world's biggest producers to curb supply. The glut is looking so severe that the Trump administration is considering paying American companies to leave crude in the ground. And the world's top gold miner, Newmont Corp, said gold is poised to top $2,000 an ounce and will remain elevated over the next 5 years. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
And again, spot gold now at $17.13 the ounce. Amazon.com shares pushing higher again, up another 4.1%. CEO Jeff Bezos says the online retail giant is developing COVID-19 testing capabilities as a first step toward a system of regular checks on its employees globally. 1:02 on Wall Street. Time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. Here he is, working from home, Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. ADRs are lower along with U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is down about 0.3%, and the S&P 500 is lower by 0.1%. France's Vivendi has lost 6% in U.S. trading. The investor advisory firms Institutional Shareholder Services and Glass Lewis recommended against re-electing Yannick Bolloré as chairman of the media company's advertising unit, Havas. His family has a controlling stake in Vivendi. Electricité de France has fallen 7.4%. The power generator estimated that output from its nuclear plants will drop by more than 20% this year. The outlook reflects declining demand because of the coronavirus. Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing has climbed 5.8% after forecasting sales growth of about 30% this quarter. TSMC reaffirmed plans to increase capital spending for the year by as much as 7.5% to $16 billion. And the UK's Informa has gained 7.7%. The events manager and publisher raised about $1.25 billion through a share sale, equaling about a 20% stake. The price was set at the upper end of an earlier estimate, Charlie.
All right, we thank you very much, Dave Wilson, tracking those American depository receipts. Again, recapping equities mixed. S&P down now by 5 points, a drop of 0.2%. The Dow lower by 0.8%. NASDAQ higher by 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
We have the strongest economy by far in the world.
We need an economy that works for everybody.
I am the one who has the broadest coalition.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
They've got the money they need to run a very competitive race.
These lawyers brought the case, and in my view, they should be sanctioned.
We want certainty in the markets. We want certainty in our trading relationships.
The administration is trying to create a new divided world.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
President Trump is set to announce guidelines for reopening the American economy. The nation waits for the next wave of spending from Congress, and finger-pointing takes the place of global cooperation on the public health response to the virus. From New York, welcome to the second hour of Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston, and as we come to air, we are waiting now for the news conference of Governor Phil Murphy from New Jersey, which should be beginning shortly. But in the meantime, let's talk about that WHO dispute. President Trump says that the World Health Organization botched the early response to the spread of the COVID-19, and he's suspended U.S. payments to the Global Public Health Organization as a result. We welcome now a member of one of the WHO advisory committees, Jamie Metzel, who is also a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Welcome. It's good to have you back with us, Jamie. So give us your reaction. I suspect it's not favorable to what President Trump has done here.
Yeah, it's terrible. The WHO is not perfect. It certainly made some mistakes in the early stages of this crisis. But if there was ever a time where we needed the WHO to be as strong and effective as it could possibly be, it's now, because this virus is spreading. It's soon going to be hitting places in the developing world harder. Those countries rely on the WHO. We all rely on the WHO to develop a coordinated response. And if this virus has taught us anything, it's that we're all one humanity sharing common threats. And if we can imagine that we can just hide behind walls, we're seeing that those walls won't protect us. We have to come together. The WHO is the best vehicle for doing that, and we should be working to strengthen it.
So I want to get as quickly as we can to what we should go going forward, but just spending one more moment on what happened before. If the WHO did fall down on the job somehow, how did it do that? Is that because it's supposed to enforce something called international health regulations against China that China may have violated in not making the full and timely disclosure?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. One, the WHO is not set up to overpower states, and so the WHO has to rely on information provided to it by states, and that's what it did. Second, it wasn't necessarily the WHO's fault, but China blocked the participation of Taiwan in the WHO, and Taiwan actually had useful information that wasn't considered. And then the WHO just unfortunately parroted a little bit of the early stage Chinese propaganda. And you could imagine a different WHO that would have a culture and a mandate to call foul when there's foul. And so that said, no, China, you can't block WHO experts for weeks from visiting the country, which is what China did. And WHO absolutely could have called this crisis earlier. And so WHO, I think they recognize that they could do better, and we need them to do better. And China certainly failed in a big way, and the U.S. failed in a big way, and we have to be learning those lessons, and we have to be learning them now.
And I'm sure there will be postmortems done on this, and people will report on it, and there'll be a lot that we will learn for the history books. But going forward now, what is the role right now for the WHO? Why is it important, even critical, to the global approach to this pandemic?
Because we have to have a coordinated strategy at every step. We need to have surveillance about how this is spreading, because it's not, this is going to be with us for a while, and we need to track where it's going, how it's mutating. That's a role that WHO plays. They coordinate science. There's 70 or 80 different trials now for vaccines, lots of things for treatments. WHO is the clearinghouse for all of that. They provide technical assistance and capacity enhancements for the countries around the world, particularly those with the weakest infrastructures. All of those things are critically important. And if we didn't have them, the United States would be in much greater danger.
Do we have a coordinated approach? You said we need it for a coordinated approach, but is there a coordinated approach, even on things like export restrictions on some PPE, personal protective equipment? The EU, as I understand, has some. The United States has some. It seems right now it's sort of a beggar-thy-neighbor approach around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, if you asked any human being on Earth, shouldn't we have a World Health Organization that had global surveillance capabilities, that had emergency teams that went on a moment's notice to wherever there was a first indication of an outbreak, who had the power to coordinate responses, so we all work together toward our common goal? Everybody on Earth would say, yeah, either we need it or don't we have that? And we don't have it, and it's not the fault of the WHO. It's the fault of the states that haven't allowed the WHO to be what we need.
Okay, Jamie, thank you so much. There's so much more to talk about, but we have Governor Fillmore from New Jersey coming to the podium. Thank you so much. That's Jamie Metzl from the Atlantic Council. And now we go to Governor Murphy in New Jersey.
We will do electronic notification as it relates to the overnight data and realities on Sunday, unless we think, the group of us think it is meaningful to meet even by telephone, in which case we'll let you know. I'm joined today by the woman to my right who needs no introduction, the Commissioner of the Department of Health, Judy Persicelli. To her right, a guy who's slowly creeping into that same category, also from the Department of Health, Communicable Disease Service Medical Director, Dr. Ed Lifshitz. Thank you both for being here. And to my left, a guy, another one who needs no introduction, the Superintendent of the State Police, Colonel Pat Callahan. So we'll get right to the numbers if we can. Today, we are reporting an additional 4,391 positive test results, and for a total of 75,317 New Jerseyans who have now tested positive. According to our online dashboard, again accessible through covid19.nj.gov, as of 10 p.m. last evening, 10 p.m. last night, 8,224 residents were reported hospitalized. Judy, I got that right, I hope. Of whom 1,880 were listed in critical or intensive care, and 1,645 ventilators were in use. 46 patients are at one of our field medical stations. And between 10 p.m. Tuesday and 10 p.m. last night, happy to say 802 residents were discharged from our hospitals. As I announced yesterday, the daily reports from our 3 veterans' homes have also now been added to the online dashboard. And Judy will get into more color on all of the above. And as we note every day, all of these numbers are just a snapshot in time. Overnight changes or late reports may not yet be reflected in the posted data. Sadly, with the heaviest of hearts, we also have the duty to report the loss of another 362 New Jerseyans, 362 blessed members of our state and our community due to COVID-19 related complications. Our statewide toll now sits at 3,518, and that is now officially more than the lives lost from fellow New Jerseyans in the First World War in total. God bless their souls, each and every single one of them. Here are 3 stories of those we have lost recently. First up, Michael Burke. Let's get Michael up there. God bless him. Look at that guy. Born in Patterson, but for the entirety of his life, he called nearby Little Falls home. And he devoted much of that life to his hometown. Mike was a volunteer firefighter, a 48-year member of the Singac Fire Company number 3. And for 26 of those years, he served as the company's president. He also served for 14 years as president of the Little Falls Fire Department. When he wasn't at the firehouse or out fighting fires or tending to emergencies, his day job was as vice president of Tritech Design, Inc. in Little Falls. To his son, Tyler, with whom I spoke earlier, and his fiancée, Kathy, and the entire Little Falls community, Mayor James Damiano reached out as well. We are with you all in mourning Mike's passing and his blessed life. We also lost Solomon David. There he is. God love him. By the way, lost at the tender age of 41. He was an EMT with Trinitas Regional Medical Center in Elizabeth for 9 years. He also worked at St. Barnabas Medical Center as a hyperbaric safety officer in the wound care center. But his most important jobs were as husband to his wife, Renee, and again, I spoke to Renee earlier today, God bless her, and father to their children, Soul and Journey. Solomon was a basketball coach for the North Plainfield Nothing But Nets organization. He was also a businessman, the owner of his own clothing company, Soulful Journey brand. And it's hard not to see where he got that name. Helping people was his true calling, and I know his family and community will miss that the most. May God bless him and each and every one of his family and friends. 75 years ago yesterday, on April 15th, 1945, the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was liberated by British forces. One of those freed that day was Margaret Feldman. There she is. Margaret passed away from COVID-19 complications on Tuesday, April 14th. She was just about 2 months shy of her 91st birthday. She was born Margaret Buchhalter in Budapest and grew up in a small town near the border with Czechoslovakia. When the Nazis came, she and her parents were sent to Auschwitz. Her parents were murdered there. But she lied about her age, telling the soldiers that she was 18 and not 15, making her eligible to serve forced labor. She would survive being sent to several camps, including one return trip to Auschwitz and a death march to Bergen-Belsen. She was still just 16 and a survivor at her liberation. She would soon move to Sweden and came to the United States in 1947 upon discovering an aunt and uncle who had moved here. Margaret would become an X-ray technician and in 1953 married Harvey Feldman, with whom she would raise a family. Their son Joseph, himself, by the way, a medical doctor working in East Orange, and I spoke to him earlier today, and daughter Tina. And she and Harvey would see their children marry and give them 3 grandchildren. Harvey, her husband, it should be noted, is currently in Morristown Medical Center, also with COVID-19. Please, everybody, keep him in your prayers. Margaret was active in her synagogue and with the Jewish Federation of Somerset, Hunterdon, and Warren counties, among other organizations. But Margaret's legacy is best captured in her work to ensure that the world never forgets the horrors of the Holocaust. She would share her story of survival and liberation with tens of thousands of students across the state and served as a founding member of both the New Jersey Holocaust Education Commission and the Holocaust and Genocide Institute at Raritan Valley Community College. For her, I recall the words of the great Elie Wiesel, and I quote him, "Just as despair can come to one only from other human beings, hope too can be given to one only by other human beings." Margaret gave us so much hope over her 90-plus years. She will be buried tomorrow, 2 days after the 75th anniversary of her liberation. May her memory be a blessing to her family and to us all. 3 remarkable lives of 3 remarkable New Jerseyans. Each gave so much to their communities, and for every single one of them, those we have just lost and those we have lost over the past number of weeks, we take a moment to remember and we look to our flags flying at half-staff. This is the ultimate toll of COVID-19. All of a sudden, social distancing doesn't seem so much of an inconvenience if it means that we don't have to keep mourning so many blessed souls. It remains the key to us flattening the curve and eventually coming down the other side of it to the point where we can responsibly begin the process of reopening our state. I've been showing, Dan, help me out here, I've been showing this map every day, and I want us all to see it again. Our efforts, folks, are working. We're not home yet by any means, but our efforts are working. Over the past few weeks, we've taken a map that was once red and bright orange, and we're turning it lighter and lighter, and that's good news. It means that we're aggressively slowing the transmission of COVID-19. But if we let up even just a bit, we will risk seeing these colors rapidly turning to bright orange, and please God, not again to red. And again, the colors determine how fast the spread is doubling. This is our challenge together. Our goals are twofold: to flatten the curve and bend it back down. We cannot have a spike. That would be potentially disastrous for our healthcare system and its workers, and it would mean countless more deaths. 3,518 is already 3,518 too many, and we know we're going to lose more of our blessed residents. But how many more depends on you and we maintaining our practice of social distancing, of staying at home. Please continue to do just that. It is working, notwithstanding the loss of these blessed lives. It is working. And together we will break the back of the curve, the virus, bring it down as far as we can, as close to zero, and begin responsibly get back on our feet. It is in this vein that today I'm announcing that our public schools will remain closed through at least Friday, May 15th, another 4 weeks. I've made this decision in careful consultation with Judy in the Department of Health, as well as Dr. Ritholtz in the Department of Education, among other key stakeholders. Let me be perfectly clear. There's nobody who wants to open the schools more than I do. I'm a father of 4 kids, one of whom is in high school, and I want him to return to his regular classrooms. But I can't do that right now. But I remain hopeful we can. We cannot be guided by emotion. We need to be guided by where the facts on the ground, science, and public health take us. And that means it will not be safe to reopen our schools or start sports back up for at least another 4 weeks. I know this is hard. It's hard on all of us. I've got a senior in college. His graduation ceremonies have been canceled. It's hard. But if we all keep pulling and working together, I hope that it will put me in a position in a month's time to make a different announcement. There is no doubt we are saving lives, and we must maintain the course. Now, please allow me to switch gears to a couple of separate topics. I will first address the heavy news.
We have been listening to Governor Phil Murphy of the state of New Jersey, as we do pretty much every day with his report. And he reported, as he always does, on the increased number of cases, the situation with the hospitals, and very sadly, the increased number of deaths. And in going through those deaths, he drove home the point that is why we need to keep the social distancing going, because so he doesn't have to keep announcing these people who tragically have died. At the same time, he did announce that he's going to extend the time that the public schools will remain closed in New Jersey until at least May 15. He would love to get everybody back to school, but it's not safe yet. So at least until May 15. That tracks what Governor Cuomo recently announced with respect to people staying at home in New York until May 15. So that, once again, was Governor Phil Murphy of the state of New Jersey. And now we're going to go to Charlie Pellet for BizFlash.
Hi, thank you very much. David Weston, quick check of the markets with the Dow, the S&P, both lower right now. Little changed on the S&P 500 index, down now by 2 points. That is a drop of about 0.1%. NASDAQ holding on to gains, up 55 points, up 0.7%, while the Dow is now down by 157 points, down now by 0.7%. We've got the 10-year with a yield of 0.60%, up 10.30 seconds right now, and gold is up 0.1%, 17.18 the ounce. Crude oil trading below $20 a barrel here in New York at 19.67. That is a drop of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. From New York, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. Congress appropriated $350 billion for small businesses as part of its $2 trillion package, and it's run through all that money. The question is more money on the way? And for a report, we turn now to Jack Fitzpatrick. He is Bloomberg government congressional reporter. So where are we with this? There seems to be a standoff up on Capitol Hill, Jack.
Yeah, there's a standoff. There's a holding pattern where both parties agree that another $250 billion is necessary for small businesses. But Democrats have said there needs to be more medical money. They want $100 billion for hospitals, community health centers, personal protective equipment, et cetera, and $150 billion for state and local governments. They've also proposed a 15% increase in the maximum amount you can get through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, although they have been talking about that a little less lately. So the question is, do we do small business stuff very quickly right now alone, or do they rush to try to get more money for hospitals and state and local governments in there? And Republicans have said they just want to do small business stuff right now, and the Democrats have not backed down on those additional requests.
As a practical matter, Jack, don't they have to do the simple thing? Because Congress is not in session. Don't they have to do this by unanimous consent or something with nobody disagreeing?
Yes, and that throws a wrench into this, because this is happening in the Senate, where Republicans have brought up, I think last week they brought up a unanimous consent request. Democrats objected. Republicans objected to Democrats' counter request. But if this gets through the Senate, the House has to pass this in order to send it to the president, and we're still in this facing this issue where Thomas Massey, the Republican from Kentucky, has said he doesn't want to UC something through the House or even voice vote it. And when this objection came from him for the last bill, the CARES Act, he raised a point of order saying there wasn't a quorum present, and in order to address that and dismiss his concerns, the House had to bring him back a majority of members. So some major piece of legislation again.
Yeah, and brought everybody down on him, including the President of the United States, as I recall. Some pretty nasty things were said about him because he brought all those people back. Okay, Jack, really appreciate you being with us for that quick update. That's Jack Fitzpatrick of Bloomberg Government. We'll keep monitoring that as the day progresses to see whether, in fact, they can replenish the $350 billion for small business. Coming up here, what's the best way to get the economy started again? President Trump says he's going to have some guidelines out this afternoon. Well, we are going to talk with Bloomberg opinion columnist Michael Strain, who has his own view about the 7-point checklist for
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. New York Governor Cuomo is extending the pause on New York businesses until May 15th. And Italy reported a bump in new virus cases. That's sending stocks lower. The Dow falling 205 points, S&P down 9. but the tech-heavy NASDAQ is up 44 points. On the labor front, another 5 million workers filed jobless claims. Last week's increase brings the total number of claims to 22 million over the past month. Housing starts dropped in March by the most in 36 years as the impact of the coronavirus rattled the property market. And Ford Motor Company is experimenting with giving employees wearable social distancing devices to keep them apart once its factories reopen. Volunteers are testing wristbands that vibrate when employees come within 6 feet of one another. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Right now, Doctors Without Borders medical teams are operating in some of the most remote and dangerous corners of the world. When front yards become front lines, at the crossroads of conflict and epidemic, where there are no hospitals, that's where we operate. Your response is critical to our response in places where few others will go. That's where we operate. Learn more at doctorswithoutborders.org.
The Bloomberg Business of Sports podcast. How did the Yankees become this mega valuable team? Where the money is flowing inside sports around the globe.
From the marketing perspective, where are the dollars spent?
From union heads to team owners, Scott Soshnick and Michael Barr speak to the names that power this multi-billion-dollar industry.
Boston Red Sox CEO Sam Kennedy.
National Hockey League Commissioner Gary Bettman.
Bloomberg Business of Sports. Listen today on Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Are you interested in a challenge?
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip number 5, cooking something. We all get stuck in a culinary rut with our normal routine. Shake things up in the kitchen by trying an ambitious new recipe or an over-the-top dessert. If cooking really isn't your thing, you can always support your local restaurants by ordering out. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen from Home on TuneIn.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
While he was gone, Al had some kind of vote to make him the managing. You remember, he used to come up all the time in the Raiders game that he was the managing general partner. By the way, don't forget, there was a lot going on in Munich. But you know how tired that man was to come back and find out that Al Davis had strong-armed his team from him while he was gone?
Search The Right Time with Bomani Jones to listen.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
For weeks, we've heard about panicked shoppers causing a run on toilet paper by irrationally hoarding it. But that ignores one key factor.
That the toilet paper you use when you leave the home is not the same toilet paper you use at home.
How incomplete information, whether about supply chains or infection rates, leads to incomplete narratives. Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC Studios on TuneIn today.
Get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft with TuneIn.
Do your homework on this year's top prospects, rising stars, and late-round sleepers with football podcasts like Move the Sticks.
Is my pick because I know he is an athletic freak, a guy that is capable of doing it all. He can blitz, he can run, he can cover.
And when the draft gets underway on April 23rd, follow every round and every pick for free.
In the 2018 NFL. It's always football season on TuneIn.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, And it may be recency bias, having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Coming up on Balance of Power, what's the best way to get the American economy back to work again? We talk with Bloomberg opinion columnist Michael Strain about the question of the hour. But first, let's get a market check with Charlie Pellet.
All right. I thank you very much, David Weston. It has been a